So good morning to you all. I think it will be good morning for most of you signing in from EMEA, whether it be London, Europe, whatever, welcome. I know we have a scattering of people from all parts of the globe, so also good afternoon and good evening. For those of you that may be ringing in from where myself and David are broadcasting from today, which is a wet, windy Sydney day in Australia. And if you hear some cracking during the webinar, you'll know that we're going through the middle of a thunderstorm. So it's nothing untoward. It's just going to be quite some loud cracks, but it's almost passed overhead, so it should be fine. So
or it's me cracking the whip.
Yes, well, it's my colleague telling me to go faster. You won't know which. Now, welcome to the next instalment in Protecht Group's risk management webinar series. And tonight we're going to be, or this morning I should say, we're going to be talking about third-party risk management, and particularly focusing on the sobering question, how protected are you from your third-party risks? And I think the issue for us here is that third-party risk has been around for a very long time. We've always used third parties, but it's really come to the fore now. And there's many drivers that have brought it to the fore, not least COVID. And what we're going to be doing is early on thinking about what those drivers are. In many ways, the perfect storm for third-party risk management. So many pressures that have got to the point now where this has become absolutely critical. I think the other important thing is that we obviously look for this gold and silver lining in the pandemic of COVID. And I think what's very clear here is what stresses us and puts us under pressure usually makes us grow stronger. And I really do believe that's the case with COVID and risk management, that we are certainly learning and growing stronger from it. There's the silver lining. Without any further ado, though, it gives me great pleasure to welcome my co-founder at Protecht and also the CEO. And I'll just pass you over to David for a quick introduction. David.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here. I'm always so excited to do presentations with our co-founder, Dave. And in terms of how we reference each other tonight, he's D1 and I'm D2. That's because of my youth. But really pleased to be here. Certainly from my point of view, I love using technology to help our customers solve these complex at times complex risk management problems, third-party vendor risk management, one of them. So my role today is to sort of help you visualize what D1 talks about during this session in the Protecht ERM platform. Over to you, Dave.
Great, thank you, and make it easy for you. I've changed my name to David as well. My role is the Chief of Research and Content at the Protecht Group. Fairly self-explanatory, but one of our values at Protecht is to be the pioneer, and in a conjunction with redefining the way the world thinks about risk. Why? Because we love risk management, and we want everybody else to love it to reap the true value from it. So that is really the research part, and also the content part is the production of content, particularly for education and training around methodologies, for also our marketing, a lot of webinars such as this, blogs and ebooks, and also content for our Protecht ERM platform, of which some David will use in visualization a little bit later. Now, in terms of what Protecht is all about, I think the name kind of gives it away. That is our absolute love of risk management, which is protection, and also love of technology to facilitate great risk management, hence the TECH at the end, Protecht. Now, in terms of what we do the four things that we believe are required in order to do great risk management. First and foremost is automation and use of technology for risk management, and for that we have our Protecht ERM system, which David will use later for visualization. Secondly, people, capability, culture, knowledge, capability, and that is risk training. Number three is risk advisory, and that's about embedding risk management into the business, particularly with our system clients, embedding the capability of the software and the systems within the business so it becomes part of every day. And lastly, sometimes call it boring but important, and I can say that because I look after it, and that is consulting, and that is the glue that makes it all hang together, such things as enterprise risk management frameworks, risk appetite statements, risk management policies, governance, and the like. And we believe getting those four things right is the key to great risk management. And it really highlights that as a firm, we love risk and we love tech, and therefore we are a risk tech firm, combining the two together. Now, moving on to the presentation. Firstly, a little bit of introduction and housekeeping. Just to be clear with everybody, number one, please ask questions. You've got a question box in a question panel. Don't wait till the end. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but keep your questions posted as we go through, as you think of them. Any questions we don't answer during the webinar, we'll answer in a written form and share that with everybody. At the end of the webinar, we would love you to stay online for another 30 seconds to 60 seconds just to answer a few small feedback questions, which is really, really important for us to factor into future presentations. And to save you lots of scribbling as we go through the presentation, you'll be sent a PDF copy of the slides and also a link to the recording of the webinar if you wish to view any part of it again or need to share it with a colleague. So getting into the essence of the presentation, I'm going to be looking at really 5 things before I pass over to Dave for visualization, and that is to appreciate the drivers of third-party risk management and the objectives. What are we trying to achieve here? What I call the why in risk management. Number 2 is to understand the scope and size of third-party risk management within your organization, and that to a degree is your choice, thinking about which third parties will you cover and the extent of the third-party risk management. Number 4, understanding what third-party risk is. It's not easy and it's not a one single answer, but it's really important to be very clear of what third-party risk is. We often say you cannot manage what you don't understand, so that's a little bit of a piece in drilling into that. Then we're going to look at the components of a strong third-party risk management framework. Now that really feeds off ISO 31000 and the overarching enterprise risk management framework of which third-party risk management should be a part of. Then I'll finish off my piece with looking at the life cycle of third-party risk management from beginning to end, and then I'll pass over to Dave for visualization of that in a really practical way. We'll then finally move on to next steps in Q&A, and that's where we would love to have lots of questions that can challenge us with, and hopefully we can provide some answers. So firstly, let's go to the beginning, which is really what exactly is third-party risk management? Well, let's go back one stage and ask the question, what is third-party risk, which I'll expand a little bit later. And for that, I want to start with the definition of risk in the ISO standard. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Now, if we now add the word third party in, we need to understand what is a third party. Using the Oxford Dictionary, a person who is involved in a situation in addition to the 2 main people involved, which is why it's called third party. Now, the irony of the English language, if you apply that to what we're talking about today, it doesn't make any sense. What we're really talking about is second party risk management, which is any party that is particularly legally separated from us as an organization, which means we have less influence and less control over them. So actually it should be called second party risk management, but it's not, it's third party. And as a result, we stick with what everybody understands, even though tongue in cheek, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now let's think about then, what does that mean for third party risk? It's therefore the effect of uncertainty on our objectives arising from third parties. I'll refine that a little bit more later, but that means that then third party risk management, which is what we're here to talk about in this session, is the management of risks originating from third parties, and then highlighting entities and persons we have limited direct control or influence over. And that's what makes third party risk management essential but tricky. That affect or may affect our organization's objectives. So it's like any other risk, except it's caused by or contributed to by third parties in the way that we've just described. Now, with that as an upfront discussion point about what exactly it is, what's the drivers of it? Well, if we think about the drivers over the last 2-3 years, it's been the perfect storm. What are they? Number 1, the increasing dependency that business has on third parties. Over the last 10-20 years, we've really moved to understand what is our niche and what is our speciality, and why don't we rely on others who are real specialists in their fields to be able to contribute to us. If I go back to the 90s, both myself and David were involved with financial institutions. We worked for banks, and the banks, the 2 banks I worked for, they both had big IT departments, and those IT departments built software. We created software from scratch. Now, I once had someone say to me, who was a software provider, look, Dave, we don't try and be a bank? Why are you trying to be a software development company? Kind of an eye-opener. As a result, we've realized that it's much more refined now and efficient to use the specialist parties to go and support us in our non-core supporting areas, which is why dependency has dramatically increased. Not mentioned software side, obviously the emergence of cloudware, software as a service, has increased that exponentially in the IT field. Number two, concentration. The increased dependency we have on single, very large third parties. In the tech space, Amazon Web Services is a great example where the impact that would have on business, generally on markets, on economies, if something were to happen major, is huge. So concentration risk, we're relying on single or groups of third parties much more than we ever did. I mentioned COVID-19, the realization that shocks do happen, and as a result, those shocks affect our third parties and that dominoes into us. Now, we shouldn't just forget that there's other big risks out there other than COVID-19. I think there's a greater appreciation now that there was a much higher increased likelihood of major disruptive events, whether that be weather, whether that be social, whether that be geopolitical, whether it be pandemics. And those of you that are statisticians or mathematicians, we call it reversion to the tail. And this is a trend that's happening. Now, typically with a random, type risk, we get reversion to the mean. And that means over time, we tend to get the aggregation of our risk coming back to the average. The bell-shaped curve, some of you might remember the normal distribution, the peak, where what we're starting to see now more and more globally is reversion to the tail. And the tail is where the really big disruptive events occur. And we're seeing a much higher incidence of that. And that obviously affects and disrupts our supply chains through disrupting our third parties. Linked to that is increased connectivity. Now, our ecosystems, which are becoming extremely complex systems globally, have become way more interconnected. Therefore, the concept of chaos theory, with the butterfly fluttering its wings in the Amazon rainforest, ends up with an earthquake in Japan. Now, in many ways, that analogy holds true now for our complex systems. The small impact somewhere in the infrastructure may be a ship being caught in the Suez Canal. Whether that's small, I'm not sure, but the disruptive event that can cause is incredible. An increased focus on operational resilience, particularly if you're in the financial services sector. We're seeing the regulators now getting us to focus much more on testing how resilient are we in terms of in terms of facing adversity and big events. Now, a big part of that is going to be our third-party infrastructure and how resilient is that third-party infrastructure. Linked to that then is direct regulation over third parties. Now, obviously, in some jurisdictions, we have regulators talking about focusing on material outsourced suppliers, particularly in financial services. We have governments focused on critical infrastructure, right? And this is all very much to do with the reliance on third parties. We've also then got our ISO standards, particularly 27001 on information security management, talks a lot about the reliance on third parties and the importance of covering that off, particularly around cyber within data held by third parties. And 27036 particularly focuses on information security for supplier relationships. Now, if that's not enough, I'd like to overlay it with good third-party risk management is really about good business practice. It's the right thing to do given our focus on the sustainable achievement of our objectives. So that's the perfect storm for third-party risk management, to say the least. Now, in terms of the objectives of third-party risk management, we're trying to improve our ability to manage the level of uncertainty over the achievement of our organizational objectives arising from third-party relationships. To be more specific, managing the uncertainty of supply of goods and services. That's a really big one with our suppliers, vendors. Manage the level of risk within our organization, which is created and sourced from our third parties. That might be cyber risk, fraud and corruption, right? Compliance risks. Thirdly, is to maximize the level of resilience in our complete ecosystem, incorporating all our supply chains and third parties. And to finish on a slightly more positive note, which is giving less airplay, but important, and that is to turn it on its head and think about opportunity risk within our third parties. Identifying where there is uncertainty, where it could end up with a better outcome than what we expect. For example, we may have a great relationship with a third party who is a technology development company, and we realize through our relationship that they are just kind of investing in the latest, greatest out there technology. Now, to take a risk, we might become a guinea pig, maybe that's not the right word, a pilot for their software. That could be quite risky on the face of it, but it could yield incredible results if this software is going to give us a competitive advantage. That's one example of opportunity risk. So that really highlights then the principles of what third-party risk is, the drivers of it, and also our key objectives in managing third-party risk. So let's now focus on the what. And the what is really, what is your third-party risk management processes going to cover? And you've got to make a call here, strategically, practically, what is it going to cover? Now, to be expansive, what are or who are our third parties? Now, this won't be an exhaustive list, but it gives you thinking about the potential breadth of our third parties. Now, the key critical issue is what will your third party risk management framework, processes, capability cover? And I think most of us will definitely be covering suppliers and vendors, contractors, outsourced suppliers. That would be the core of what we do. Right, now, often we start there, but over time, you might want to think about what about your other third parties that aren't so obvious? What about shareholders? We got a major shareholder who's a bit painful. They can create a huge amount of risk. I was doing quite a big assignment overseas 3 or 4 years ago, and this is an organization that is a 51% shareholder is government. And without naming names, it's a pretty interesting government. Let's say it's quite volatile. And the amount of risk that brought to the organization was absolutely huge, and they had to manage them as a third party. Now, the issue is, what are you going to cover in your third party risk management? Well, I would suggest, depending on your level of maturity right now, don't start with all of these. It will grind to a halt. Keep it simple and start with the really key ones, suppliers and vendors, and over time, start bringing it together. Now, in terms then of the scope of the third-party risk management, we also have to think about roles, responsibilities, accountabilities. Who in your organization is going to be involved in third-party risk management? And while we're at it, third-party management, which is really closely linked. Now, here is but some departments that is going to be involved, and there are many of them, from procurement through legal, compliance, BCP, obviously third-party relationship management, and so on. Now, they need to understand their roles, responsibilities, accountabilities with respect to third-party risk management. So coordination is key. Now, in addition to all of the scope of third-party risk management, you have to consider what is the size of the problem. So depending on what you capture, what's the existing number of existing third parties? How big is the problem? What's the volume of new ones in terms of onboarded ones and new ones being selected going through the assessments? How voluminous is that? What's the volume of offboarding? Do you have the appropriate resources for that volume? Now, in large organizations, this can be huge, as we know, running into the thousands of third parties. How are you going to deal with it? Now, we're going to sum this up at the end, but some of the key issues to consider. Avoid a siloed approach to third-party management and third-party risk management, because that will often lead to duplication of process, where we've got information on third parties in 17 different systems and they all say something different. So avoid duplication. Therefore, create an enterprise approach to third-party risk management where you are coordinating all of the parts of the organization that are dealing with third parties. Now, that was an opening slather around the principles of third-party risk management, the drivers, and also then the scope of it. And I think it's about time I got you to get involved. So fingers on the buttons. I'm just going to launch a very simple poll here, and I would be really appreciative for you to join in. And that is really about, how are your third parties currently being managed in your organization? And just pick the one here that is most close to where you believe you are or how you are managing it. and then we'll share those the results with you. I'll give you about another 20 seconds or so. That should get pretty much everybody answering, and then I'll share the results with you. Okay, 5 and close. Okay, I'm now going to close and share with you. Let's see what we've got. We've almost got an even split between ad hoc, depending on where the relationship happens to sit, and centralized by third-party type, such as suppliers with procurement, shareholders with the corporate office, whatever you might have. And then we have 10% of you with full enterprise approach. So a big round of applause for the 9% that are at the end there. That is our holy grail. That is what we are trying to aspire to, but I'm sure that 9% will probably manifest how much effort and work that requires, but equally the value you get out of the other end having achieved it. Now, I also don't know the size of the organizations based on your responses, and I'd expect some of the full enterprise approach will be large organizations with huge budgets, and it's critical, and maybe even some that it's easier to manage because they've got a smaller number of third parties. But thank you. There are 2 other polls, so don't go to sleep quite yet, and I'll share those with you when we get to the appropriate spot. Okay, so now in terms then of understanding third-party risk, we cannot manage what we don't understand. So let's get very clear what we mean by third-party risks. Now, in terms then of risk, the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and we then said that that then manifests a third-party risk management as the effect of uncertainty on objectives caused or contributed to by third parties. Now, let's appreciate that risk is not a single word. It's not a single sentence. Risk is a story, and that story is made up of a beginning, a middle, and an end. We often call it the chapters, or I call it the chapters. And what are they? Because if we can then apply the components of risk to this definition, it should give us a bit more of an insight what exactly is third-party risk. Now, I'm sure most of you would appreciate that a risk is made up of 3 main parts. Number 1, the cause of the risk, often called the root cause, where it starts. Once the cause occurs, it then dominoes through a range of events until we come to the main event or the top event, which is usually the short name that we give for this risk in our risk registers. And then to complete the picture, given that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, we now link that risk event to the impact on objectives. Now that would be the components of inherent risk before considering controls. So now to finish it off, we need to add our controls on, and we then have residual risk. As you can appreciate, most risk events that we face have multiple causes and multiple impacts, and in addition, multiple controls. Now, these are the jigsaw puzzle that makes up risk, the life cycle of risk. Put an outline around that, and many of you will be familiar with risk bow tie analysis, which is a way to illustrate those components. Now, the question becomes then, if we talk about third-party risk, what is it? Is it a risk cause? And it might be a risk cause if we believe that that risk is outside of our influence. Because a risk cause, a root cause, is when you ask, but why did that happen? And you get to the point where the answer is it just is, or it's outside of your influence. Now, if you believe third-party non-performance and failure is outside of your influence, it would drive you to be thinking it's a cause. The other alternative is to treat it as a risk event. Let's have a look at the first one first. And here is an illustration of example set high level of cause types, cause taxonomies, if you wish. And here I've got 4 main types of cause, being people, process, systems, and external events, which is the 4 most common ones we recognize. Now, each of those, then you can go down another level. So for example, if I think about systems, this is systems failure of physical assets, software, hardware. And most importantly for today, external events covering social, political acts of nature. And yes, there it is, third party. Now that's what it would look like if we considered third party risk as a cause. To get more granular, and to utilize within our Protecht ERM system our risk bow tie tool. This is what this is, but the same principle as I showed you before. And this is an example of the risk of falling from heights. Without going through the detail of that risk, you can do in your own time. If you trace over to the left-hand side, but why, you'll see a pathway of equipment failure, weak materials, and manufacturer defect. There it is. And there is the non-performance failure of a third party through supply, and we've identified as a root cause. Now that's type number one, thinking about it as a cause. However, if you think about it as a risk event, what does it look like? Now, this is an example of a standard risk event taxonomy, and this now is utilizing at the highest level financial risks, operational risks, and strategic risks. Subcomponents, let's focus on operational risk, things like human resources, fraud, business disruption, and yes, there it is, third party. This time we're treating it as an event, which means we are not considering it as a cause anymore. So when we now go and look at our bow tie, rather than being on the left-hand side as a cause, it's in the center. There it is there, third-party failure or non-performance. Now what we're doing is we're starting to look at, but why might the third party fail or have non-performance? And I've highlighted it could be because the third party just simply is not fit for purpose at the beginning of the relationship. The third party becomes unfit for purpose even though it was at the beginning, and then it becomes unfit due to risks emanating and occurring within the organization. Now from there I can go back all the way back to the root causes within the third party. Now the issue becomes one of, is it a root cause or is it an event? And the best way to think about it is to separate this into two parts. On the left is really the third party, and on the right is us. Now the question is how much influence do you have over the left-hand side? If you think you haven't got much, third party failure is a cause. If you think, however, you can influence the left, you might start considering it as an event. How do you influence the left? It depends on the extent of influence you have, particularly around your contracting, service level agreements, and most importantly, your third-party risk management. Now, I don't know the answer of what the right answer is here. Is it a cause? Is it an event? We have clients that look upon it in both ways, depending on fit for purpose. So for my second poll that I want to share with you, I really want to ask that exact question, which is how do you recognize your third-party risk within your organization? And I've given you three answers that you can use here. 30 seconds again. Be interested in your view based on what we've covered. Okay, 15 seconds. Five and close. Okay, I'm going to share with you, and we've got just over a third as a risk event, which is my second example. 43% as a cause, and 20%, well, 21 not specifically recognized. Now, having done this poll elsewhere, very similar results. So there isn't one right answer. Now, I think it's really important to our philosophy in risk management is that risk management is an art form fundamentally. I think it's fair to say that in art, you can't say an artist is wrong, you can't say they're right. It's the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you've got to use the method that works the best for you. Now, what we commonly find, to summarize, is cause is usually the technically correct answer for most people outside of influence. But if you do causes, we typically report risks to boards, executives based on events. So if you have it as a cause, causing a lot of the other risks you have, it's often not shown up on the board report. And board members will often go, where's third-party risk? It's critical for us. Okay, I'll make it an event so it is reported as a separate risk category. That's really the question you have to ask. Okay, thank you for contributing again. So what we'll do now is go on to the second to last thing I wanted to touch upon, and that is the components of a strong third-party risk management framework. Now, in terms of this, the key is to make sure that we don't set up a separate third-party risk management framework. It should be a subset of your enterprise risk management framework, your overarching ERM framework. Now, at Protecht, we recognize 5 parts of an ERM framework, and we like to put it together in this following diagram, which we call the house for obvious reasons, the ERM framework house. 5 components. Now, how do we build a house? Well, it's a pretty good idea to get a fantastic foundation. And we believe the foundation for great risk management is people and culture. If we don't have good risk culture, everything else is not going to work. So we should be looking in terms of our third-party risk management, to come back to have good culture around the management of third parties, good understanding, third-party training, people and capabilities, and also very important, a good culture and conduct around our relationships with third parties. We then need a roof. The roof is the governance. We need good third-party risk management governance. Who owns the third-party risk management? What are the roles, responsibilities, accountabilities? Who within the 3 lines of defense, if you use that model, is responsible for what? What's the role of the board, risk committees, executives? Does our risk appetite take into account risk appetite for third-party risk? Do we have the appropriate policy, standard guidelines, and so on? Now we've got the floor and the roof, we need the rooms in the middle. And the rooms in the middle are all about our actual practical processes. And this is what David's going to use to visualize a little bit later. And we're going to touch upon these in a second, which is the components that make up the life cycle of third-party risk management, encapsulating pre-onboarding, onboarding, ongoing monitoring, risk management, and offboarding. Now we need the right-hand wall, the penultimate part of the framework, which is the so what wall, which is the so what with all the risk we do, how are we going to use it? This is reporting, escalation, response, risk acceptance, using it in decision making, providing assurance, looking for red flags, how we're using our third-party risk management. And the left-hand wall is continuous improvement. Right? So this is all about continuous improvement of our third-party risk management capability over time, and also maturity of the way that we manage our third parties, which is our business processes. Now that to us makes up the 5 key components, and a big part of it is the middle part, which is we're going to touch upon now to have a look at the life cycle of third-party risk management. And we generally break the life cycle down into 3 parts: beginning, the middle, and the end. Makes sense? The first one then is pre-onboarding and onboarding, which is the beginning of the life cycle of third-party risk management, incorporating the identification of third parties that we may or may not form a relationship with, often done from a request for proposal, all those things we do to decide to select a third party. We then typically would do an initial data collection, the basic information, which allows us to do an initial tiering of how much work and effort do we need to put in to the due diligence in relation to this third party. We now do our due diligence, and then we decide to go or no go with that third party. No go, obviously finish. To go, then we need to move then to onboarding and contracting. So that's really the bringing the third party on board. We then move then to the life cycle of that third party. And a lot of people will often do their initial due diligence, and then they kind of don't do too much after that, which is not great because the third party may well change. Ongoing monitoring. For that, we need to make sure we have compliance with our contract, service level agreements, and to measure ongoing performance of that third party, how they are performing. In addition to that, then, we need to think about contract renewal as the contract rolls over, updating certifications, insurance, and so on, and then moving to the ongoing management of risks emanating from our third parties. That will incorporate updating our due diligence, almost an ongoing kind of risk assessment. We will then also be looking at risk metrics. What metrics can we use to more track our third-party risks on a more real-time basis? From there, we'll be looking at our incident management. If an incident occurs within our third parties, how are we going to manage that? Also then finally, we need to be thinking about then our issues and actions that we're finding as part of this process and remediating those actions, remediating those issues with actions to strengthen our process. And then finally, we've got to always remember the offboarding. very important part of third-party risk management. And what have we got to think about there? This should include contract closeout, ensuring obligations have been met. Any goods and services the third party has that are returned. Also, data that they hold of ours is deleted and cleaned. Our access rights that we've given them have been terminated, physical and technical access rights. Any promotions that they're doing, associations have been removed and they're not still using us within their promotions. Contagion risk if they misbehave after we've onboarded. Removed from our finance, the finance departments and all the records as a supplier, and also maybe ensuring ongoing obligations are met if there's any obligations on the third party that go past the offboarding period. Now, all of those three life cycle phases require a lot of data. So this is where our automation comes in, centralizing through a third-party registry, vendor registry, and then capturing information to do all of the things we just spoke about from where. Number one, the third party themselves, information flowing both ways. Number two, remembering that it's not just about the third party, it's the fourth party, fifth party, sixth party. How do we gather information down the supply chain? Also then using third-party agencies where relevant, credit bureaus and so on. Also then using information from regulators, particularly around the regulatory requirements over third parties. Thinking about external media sources for news stories about the third party, and very importantly, information we have internally scattered across the organization. Now, there's a lot in what I just covered. Hopefully didn't go too fast, but what I want to do now is to make it really practical through visualization and to hand over to David B, sorry, T1, or was it D2? I forget who the older one was, Dave. To do this, I'm going to hand over to Dave. And from that point onwards, I want you to think about then how we practically visualize our third-party risk management through the use of a system. Now, Dave, I'm struggling to pass this over because I've lost my screen. Could you take control of it? I don't know what's. Oh, I've got it. Have you managed to do it? You're one step ahead. Over to you, mate.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dave. And just for the record, you are D1, I am D2. Everybody,
old and young, yes.
That's right. So everybody, for those of you that are new to these sessions, I'm just going to have a quick introduction to the Protecht ERM platform. You can see on this launchpad that it is a full enterprise risk management product that covers the life cycle of risk. And I think, I always love listening to Dave's D1's presentations because he always continues to reference that life cycle concept. And even from an enterprise risk management perspective, obviously that's got validity. And in this dashboard, we see that life cycle concept in that we do initial identification of the risks, continual monitoring of those risks through, activities such as controlled testing, attestations, key risk indicators, and then treatment plans and other audit findings, incidents that are connected to that overall risk profile. In this product, we're able to do those connections. We bring them all together to plot against either the business unit risk profile, and that really gives us that connected view of risk across the life cycle of it. And when we think about doing risk assessments, the concept of having that information to give us a more informed view of that particular risk, we're able to see the monitoring results, things such as open actions, incidents, and audit findings that are connected to it. And that really helps us move away from what are often subjective 5x5 assessments to more informed view as to how that particular risk is being monitored. So how does that theory apply to third-party vendor risk management? Well, really same principles apply. Initially we identify our key vendors. We then think about the risk level for those vendors, and then we do continual monitoring of the vendors through attestation programs such as modern slavery, anti-bribery and corruption, security questionnaires if it's an IT application. We then also think about capturing incidents or events that are related to those third parties. So when we look at this application, Protecht ERM really allows you to build any type of application to cover that life cycle of risk. Compliance is another good example where we think about identifying our obligations, what are the risks associated with those key controls, and then move through that whole life cycle concept as well. But today really is about vendor management. So when we hop into the vendor management concept, you can see that we've got 3 tiles here that represent the building blocks of third-party risk management, starting with the vendor registry. When I click on that tile, it will open it up to a listing of the vendors that I have in my organization. And if I pick on one, I can open up that record. And, you know, pretty basic stuff here. We're looking at what is the name of the entity, business address, and appreciate that this information might be in an existing procurement product, which, you know, can be interfaced and that information pulled so that we don't have duplicate information. But really what we're looking at doing is not only having that contract information, but going through that lifecycle management that we'll move through for shortly. Things like vendor tier are important because I think whenever we start these programs, often it can be a bit overwhelming, particularly if you're a larger organization with a large volume of vendors. So really what we can think about doing is tiering them and then focusing on those more important ones initially, and then thinking about less intensive processes for lower tiers. As we move through, we can also capture things such as certifications and insurance certificates of currency. In this example, simply connected through to a PI type certificate of currency, right, late in the night. All right, continual monitoring of that vendor through vendor relationship owner, SLA review frequency, risk assessment frequency and commentary, security assessment. And so really what we're trying to do is bring to life that process through automation and capturing it in a central platform. If you think about this type of product, once an owner's been assigned and it's got a date, the system will trigger a notification for that particular relationship manager to review and provide SLA commentary as to how that vendor's performing. We can also do that initial DD that Dave talked about, so we can sit there and think about, you know, how is that financial strength of the vendor. You can obviously get credit reports for this sort of thing, so you don't really need to do that, you know, yourself. Obviously plenty of credit agencies out there that can provide that type of information, and again we can interface to those sort of products as well if required. You need to think about policy strength in this day and age, so things around modern slavery, corporate social responsibility, how is the vendor thinking along those lines. Other items such as years in operation, any litigation, all of those things that can impact the stability of that vendor. From a software perspective, we can also think about how important it is from a CI, confidentiality, integrity and availability issue as well. Dave mentioned that ongoing due diligence concept, and certainly it's the same here. You know, when we think about SLA monitoring, we tend to focus on performance of the contract, but perhaps, you know, we can also think about the broader vendor due diligence piece. So we've got the ability to capture, you know, notes around that periodic review of overall DD issues. Also talked about, if we think about the end of that vendor, the offboarding process. So again, we look at everything Dave mentioned in that wheel around things about contracting being closed out, equipment, tech, physical access restrictions, data being wiped, all of those things to systematically offboard that vendor. Coming back to the tile, so then once we have the vendor, if we think about contracts associated with that vendor, we can have multiple contracts per vendor. So hence we would have a connection to that vendor. And if we look at that example here, we can see that Chubb in this example would have multiple contracts, and we can pick on, you know, one of those particular contracts to look at. Maybe a different owner in the organization, different contract value term, all of that information can be captured or pulled from an existing contract system. But again, it's really making sure we've got a systematic approach to reviewing that contract and commentary around renewal termination status. Once we've got the vendors sort of set up in the product, I think then it's really that continual monitoring piece. And there's a couple of approaches that can happen. One is more a structured security questionnaire. As an example, the system allows you to generate a strip of questions based on particular sections that you're interested in looking at. So be it ISMS governance, data, password management, all of those sort of things can be shipped out to the vendor. Or alternatively, if that's like an ad hoc type questionnaire, the other approach that we're obviously seeing in the market is the concept of regular attestations to the vendor. The product has the ability to ask any strip of questions based on either regulation or internal policies to both internal and external stakeholders. So if we look at something like anti-bribery and corruption, we can have a strip of anti-bribery and corruption questions that can be shipped out to vendors on a periodic basis once a year, where we get them to respond to those questions and really submit them with minimal fuss. The system will trigger the notification, the vendor has a login, they respond to the questions, and really they're coming back to you automatically without you having to worry about sending emails with Excel and chasing those Excel files. Because I think that's probably important then to see what does it look like from a vendor perspective. And I'm just going to log in as a vendor user. And you can see from this vendor's persona, it's pretty simple. They just log into the system. They can see they've got a number of attestation questions that they need to complete, overdue actions, or a vendor security questionnaire. They click on the questions. There's any number of questions that can be triggered to them. Answer yes or no. If they answer no, you can force comments and evidence. And at that point, really, once completed, those responses will be triggered back to the administrator of the system at that customer level. So if we think about the pain points that this sort of concept solves, first of all, we're going to get a much more consistent approach to our third-party vendor risk management. We're going to get a consistency of data that's captured, and that's all going to be done in a single process, a single place. We're going to minimize the pain of sending manual emails out to vendors for ongoing monitoring. And more importantly, like one of the great things for these sort of centralizing this sort of process is the reporting that can come out the back end of it. All of a sudden, we're able to start visualizing key information around our vendors, total number, rating of those vendors from a risk perspective, upcoming SLA reviews, security risk analysis, and action-orientated dashboards as well, where we look at contracts that are perhaps overdue from a review perspective, contracts that are expiring in the next 3 months. All that sort of information can be brought to life a lot easier using Protecht ERM as an application, for example. All right, that's all I needed to talk about. I'll hand you back over to D1 and he can close it out. And looking forward to some questions in the question box, everybody. Thanks. And good to go, Dave. We can't hear you at this stage.
You're on mute. It had to happen, didn't it? It had to happen. So what I wanted to do now is based on I guess, thinking about, automation systems and so on, really asking this question of you guys. Really appreciate getting your response. So what systems do you currently use to manage third-party risk management? So what's the predominant systems you're using? So again, 30 seconds, and then I'll share the results with you. Okay, 15 seconds. Five and close. Okay, I'm going to share with you now. Let's see what we've got. We've got a nice scattering here, which really highlights that there is no one approach here. And a lot of this has to do with maturity. So a quarter of you, no specific system used, a quarter with the beautiful spreadsheets that we love and hate. 20%, 18%, a part of an existing procurement system. That was almost identical to a previous poll we did on this with another group of organizations. 7% have a dedicated point solution for third-party risk management. That's definitely there. And a quarter, again, which is very encouraging, maybe we're biased, as part of your enterprise risk management system, which to us is really the key to make sure this is effective and efficient across the organization to avoid duplication and to ensure that we are utilizing and leveraging off our existing information, risk information within our systems. So thank you for the contribution. Okay, so that then moves us to final a couple of or final 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm just going to give you a kind of next steps, which is really thinking about what are the key steps in building great third-party risk management. And while I'm doing that, keep the questions coming, and then we'll finish off with a few questions. There's some great ones coming through, and as a result, we'll do that after this final slide. So keys for success, what should we be looking out for? Number one, think about third-party risk management not as a standalone process, but an extension and part of and integrated with enterprise risk management. Why? Because there is so much overlap. And if we can do that, we avoid duplication, and we can use then this data, one source of truth, for multiple purposes. Number two, as a result of that, take an enterprise approach, not a siloed approach, for the same reasons of efficiency, consistency, effectiveness. Take a risk-based approach, because you've got so many third parties. Like anything where we've got voluminous things such as compliance, we want to take a risk-based approach to focus on those ones that bring the biggest risk to us. Utilize existing practices and information as much as possible. Leverage off what you've already got in your organization, whether it be in procurement, legal, finance. Understand a third party, fourth party, fifth party, sixth party. And this is particularly important with something like modern slavery, the importance of understanding the complete supply chain. It isn't easy. For key third parties, maximize the level of transparency and influence you have over that third party, whether that be through contractual means, service level agreements, third party risk management monitoring, and what Dave was taking you through in terms of visualization. Exercise control through contractual SLA mechanisms before signing up. Once you've signed up, often too late, get them in the initial contracts in the agreements. Utilize third parties, bureaus for due diligence and ongoing monitoring as required. Use third party risk management that supports an enterprise approach, not a siloed approach. And finally, produce meaningful reports that give our users information about assurance, red flags, lack of assurance, where do they need to focus, and very importantly, risk reward decision making. At that stage, then celebrate, but there's a lot of work involved in doing that. So remember, it's a journey. So therefore, just take off small parts, keep it relatively simple, and build up over time. That's as much as we wanted to cover, so I'm going to flick across now to the questions and concluding comments. But Dave, over to you, because I know you've been looking through the questions.
I was going to pass one to you. It's a bit tricky, but anyway,
Okay.
I'll start with a couple. There's a couple here from Danny. Can you work with Odoo Open CRM? I think in terms of integration, yes, certainly the product integrates with any CRM application through RESTful APIs. Is the tool allowing for the linking of, say, events, linking media scanning, adverse media impacts, continuity testing, conducted to bolster operational resilience to third-party entry? I call it vendor profile building. Chris, yeah, good question. Yeah, look, I think the issue with third parties is that they are connected in multiple areas. One of the other ones would be, you mentioned business continuity and resilience. If we think about resilience, it's definitely a hot topic in both the UK and APAC. And resilience for us obviously talks about that important business service. What are the processes underneath it? And then what are the, I guess, the resources that deliver those sub-processes, such as hardware, software, third parties, teams and infrastructure. And so certainly the benefit for us from thinking about Protecht ERM is it is an all-encompassing product that allows you to connect concepts like third-party risk to other areas such as BCP and resilience, and certainly things like media scanning, credit reports, all of those things can be brought into the application. All right, non-system question. I'll read it out to Dave, put him on the spot, from Simon. Relationships with suppliers is often based not only on contracts or SLAs, but also personal relationships between account managers. How do we account for work as planned versus work as delivered? Good question around personal relationships, I reckon. But anyway.
Yeah, look, I guess there's a few items in this, and that is a couple of principles. One is, I trust you, but I'm going to check you anyway. Yeah. Now, we can get third-party, the relationships going on between account managers, and they can buy each other beers and they can go out together and so on, and we know the risks of doing that. And so this issue is about building up relationships. Yes, it has to be there, but always I'm going to check you anyway. And that to me needs to have then objective data driven analysis sitting behind it. And this is also this principle of don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me, show me. So they're going to be talking to each other, they're going to be telling each other stuff, but hey, show me the evidence. And I think the final one, it comes down to culture, because it's all very well to have SLAs and contracts in place. If we've got relationship managers that are kind of looking at each other and go, oh mate, don't worry too much about those contracts, that's just paperwork to stick in the top drawer, and then they go and do their own thing and they start creating, informal contracts and relationships and deals, we're going to get in a lot of trouble. Right? It's not enforceable, it's not in a court of law, and all sorts of things can be going on. And I'm going to go back a few years here, but let's just say in the 90s, both of us worked in a few banks, and let's say we had quite a lot of traders involved, and it was the 80s and 90s. And let's say what you just said is everything. It was all about relationships, and there was a lot of dodgy stuff is probably the right word to say. And I remember at one of my banks, we got a new treasurer. It was a European treasurer, and he looked at all these relationships and said, that's enough. And he got all of our third parties that had to send in an expense report every month with every dollar, every pound they'd spent on a relationship with any of the traders. My goodness, didn't that change? And the stuff we learnt that was going on behind the scenes that wasn't in contracts or anything else. So that to me is the view here, that we have to have relationships that are supported by data, contracts, SLAs, and we need to get a culture where our relationship managers realize that is required. Otherwise, we're heading down a pretty dark path. So brilliant question, Simon. I probably didn't answer it very well, but look, I had a go. So Dave, maybe over to you.
All right, there's a couple I'll take on. So which sectors, generally speaking, are seen to perform effective third-party risk management and are considered to be mature in their approach to experience of third parties? Kate, thanks for that question. Look, I'm probably going to be a little bit biased there, but we tend to see financial services focus and do TPRM a little bit better at this stage, and that's due to regulators forcing material outsourcing reviews with third parties. And so that would be my comment there. But that said, I think things like the pandemic have opened up a whole range of questions around supply chain risk management as well. So there's certainly seeing more focus from other sectors on how they think about their supply chain risks, and obviously third parties that are involved in that. Even things like modern slavery are putting more of a spotlight on those as well. Another question from Ingo. Welcome, a big shout out to you, Ingo. Welcome. Is the system demonstrated just a demo of what is available, or a package that has been designed and built by Protecht and can be used by its customers? Oh no, there is certainly a third-party risk management package that has been built and can be used by customers. I think certainly we're working on more content for those third-party questionnaires, which is probably a good segue into Anusha's question: is the system customizable to include an operational risk questionnaire and a tech risk questionnaire that could be provided to the supplier? Absolutely. Albeit we provide samples, it's customers often end up using their own particular questionnaires. Dave, do you want to handle the any others? Is there any others?
Look, I'm just looking at, I'm not trying to cop out, but we've got 3 minutes to go. So what I thought I'd do, if there's any others, we will respond in a written form. But I just thought I wouldn't mind making a quick comment on the one where we talk about which sectors generally are really good at third-party risk management. I'm being very specific here, but airline industry, particularly airline creation manufacturing, they can trace each nut and bolt and screw all the way back to its source. And you're pretty obvious why they need to do that. If there is an event, they need to understand in absolute minutiae detail of where the cause of the problem is. And if they find that, they have to be able to identify where that same problem exists across all the engines, all the aircraft, and to eliminate it very quickly. So because of the incredible importance of that supply chain being absolutely, I was going to say watertight, I should say airtight, it's generally very, very well done. Now, obviously, that is very much in a physical sense. They can mark components, trace back to the sources. They do huge amount of vetting on their suppliers, and maybe there's a lesson from us. We have to do it fit for purpose, of course, but it's progressively being required given the increasing impact of third parties' risks on our risks. So look, I've got about 2 minutes to go, or just 1 minute. So what I'm going to do is bring it to a close. And in terms of doing that, just wanted to highlight what's coming up next for Protecht you might want to be part of. And this is myself and D1 and D2, and we're going to get together on the 7th of December. Please join us for a fireside chat. It might be a virtual fireside where we're really looking at 2021, a year in review, both from the risk industry's point of view and Protecht, and also with a bit of crystal ball gazing into 2022 and beyond of what's kind of coming up next for risk management. In addition, on the right-hand side is our website where you can catch up on past webinars. We've got a whole series of them, and they're all pre-recorded, so you can have a look at any of those. And also, we would love to see you in future webinars as we bring them to the table. Now, finally, a massive thank you to all of you who've taken an hour out of your day to attend this webinar. We really appreciate it. We hope you've got some kind of value return from investing your time. Also, a huge thank you for Dave to take us through that visualization. And my only other request would be if you could please stay on for about 30 seconds to 60 seconds, as we've just got a webinar questionnaire that we'd love you to complete because it's great feedback for us. And other than that, have a fantastic day, or wherever you might be, fantastic remaining part of your day or evening. And thank you for joining. Thank you.
See ya.